A Glance in the Mirror. Chapter 47. Enduring the Flood. The bungalow was named La Fuenta, the fountain. The construction of the pergola and the erection of the tall wrought iron gates looked suitably impressive, giving the place presence. From the road you could look through the gates to see the fountain and the garden beyond, now fully planted with rubber trees positioned in the lawn. Terry had bought 2 half-round plaster pillars with their stone bases to stand either side of the front door. These completed the front entrance, giving the entrance an imposing appearance. The in-and-out drive further expanded the front elevation, finishing the whole design feature, and now it's the turn of the rear garden to plant just a few more trees to give shade to the pool area. Water and Beryl Vane were to return to England in the new year. They were retiring to Cirencester and greatly anticipating the move back. They were very sorry to hear that they were leaving, not just because Water taught Anna, but because they were kind and reliable, which is always very reassuring to have stationed nearby when in trouble. They were interested in the changes Josephine was making, now based on the main road, working out of Trevor Dine's estate agency buildings, which were 5 minutes down the road towards Estepona. He was keen to have someone technically capable, with a keen knowledge of financial matters close to his office, so that his clients could see that he was progressive and worthy of their custom. And they got on famously, and contacts were being made that started to build up a client bank. It was that November that Terry started to plant the trees, previously ordered and delivered. One of them was to be in the middle of the lawn, to give shade and balance to the fountain. As he started digging out the hole, he found that there was a massive lump of rock in the way, and without more ado he took his largest pick and drove it into the rock, chipping off pieces on the edge. Eventually a split was made which proved promising, and he gave it an almost almighty whack. If this had been at a fairground, trying to ring the bell in front of his girlfriend, he could not have hit it harder, nor achieved a greater ringing in the ears. There was an enormous gusher of water that flew up in the air to about the height of 10 feet, soaking him to the skin, forcing him to stagger backwards, tripping over the pile of earth. Terry had penetrated a pipe that had an enormous pressure of water running through it. He regained his feet in a second, to fly to the stop clock, only to find that it didn't shut off the gusher. He stood petrified, too aghast to move. Eventually his brain reasserted itself to question whether a finger, or perhaps a plug of wood, inserted in the offending pipe, would do. His finger wouldn't, as the pressure was far too great. The plug, however, took some time to manufacture, which meant that the whole garden was by this time under water. The plug turned out to be equally unsuitable. It wouldn't stay in the hole whilst he tried to hammer it. Eventually, by reshaping the wedge, decided it might just do. To make sure, he gave it just one last tap with a hammer. This now produced what the small hole didn't, a flood, to the extent that the plants he had just been planting now floated past him. Terry now knew what it means to wring one's hands. He also developed a tic, which he couldn't stop, for his right eyebrow kept jumping up and down. Terry called the plumber, who was naturally Spanish. It was not that his Spanish wasn't up to the task, but it was the sheer panic in his croaking voice which gave urgency to the plumber. He soon appeared at the front door to assess the situation, indicating that the water was coming out of the swimming pool. Terry now noticed that the pool was half empty, something he had failed to do in his panic. There was a great deal of teeth-sucking, rolling up of sleeves and muttered curses. The hole in the ground was enlarged and a channel dug. The water drained away, and now that the water was below the pipe, a repair could be made, for a new length of pipe was fashioned and soldered on. His tic ceased to be so violent, and a period of calm returned. Sanity returned sufficiently to offer the plumber a drink, which together with his fee ended in a roar of laughter and a faint smile, as Terry sagely nodded his head. On the occasions when Josephine flew to England, which was by now fortnightly, Anna and Terry reverted to their old custom. Anna's alarm went off at 6. She came into his room bringing with her Ruff to go over the day's itinerary, what lessons, and perhaps a trip to Gibraltar or Estepona for Terry. They both surfaced to start their day at about 10 to 7, and by the time Terry had laid the table and got the breakfast under way, it was 7:30. Cornflakes, orange juice, toast and tea were the normal fare, and Anna's school days really started off at the estate entrance. She had to be there by 8:15 to pick up the school bus. The entrance was on the main Algeciras to Marbella road. They set off at 8. Anna, dressed in her uniform of dark blue jumper, white tennis shirt, tartan wrap-round skirt, black shoes, and white socks, clutching her shoulder bag, which was always stuffed full. Terry carried her shoulder bag, also bulging. The bus was due for 8:20 and rarely late. On those odd occasions when they missed the bus, they followed on in the car, dropping Anna off inside the school gates, which was located just the other side of Estepona, opposite the Continente supermarket. Terry spent most of his days working in the garden, building a wall, planting trees, or cutting the grass and boundary hedge which surrounded the whole property. Cleaning the house or vacuuming in the pool, an afternoon job which finished at 4. Terry finished when most of the building workers on the nearby estate completed their day too. He made a cup of tea and then started to prepare the evening meal. At about 5:45 he returned to the main entrance to meet the school bus and to greet Anna, with Ruff jumping up and down in excitement and pleasure. They then walked slowly back, going through her day, arriving back by about 6:40, for her to change and Terry to finish off the dinner, to be served at 7. By 8 they had finished, washed up, and Anna well into her homework, to then prepare her things for the following day. Then they would set off to walk round the block, to allow Ruff to re-establish old stopping-off points. Terry, in his reflective armband at Anna's insistence, picking their way past the building site with the torch. They would then return home to play cards, whist or crib, listen to the radio or play a disc, finally to fall into bed at 10. They didn't have a television purposely, so that Anna would not have a distraction, although they did hire one that Christmas when Rebecca came out to spend a couple of weeks. The weather was so good that they spent some of the time on the beach walking in sight of Gibraltar, then having a picnic. It was so lovely to have such wonderful weather, basking in the heat, whilst all back home, in England, was struck in an icy blast. On Friday, January the 22nd, 1988, Terry flew back to England to help Josephine move into Hermitage Cottage and to accompany her to Switzerland for another conference. Anna and Ruff stayed with Janet Dine. Anna preferred to stay so that she could continue with her schoolwork and keep up to date with her lessons and homework. Terry heard later from Janet Dine that Anna had fit in perfectly, and it was a great treat for her to have someone there she could talk to during the day. Back in England, Helen arranged to fly out during her college holidays, which gave Terry and Anna the opportunity to show her round and catch up on all her news. They had by this time redesigned the front elevation and grounds to make them as appealing as possible. All they wanted now, according to Josephine, were some large olive oil pots strategically placed to complete the front of the house. On one of their show the surrounding countryside jaunts, Terry and Josephine took Helen up to Casares by a roundabout route via Galthine. The route took them into the surrounding hills, was the same smugglers had used many years before to bring their wares up from the coast, a matter of just over 3 miles, stopping at Maria's family restaurant for a salad lunch. The villa of Casares is one of the famous white villages of Andalusia. The town's historic 12th century castle, built by King Mohammed V of the Nasrid dynasty, commands the hilltop. On the same site sits the 15th century monastery, an important Christian pilgrimage centre, venerating the patron saint, the Virgin del Rosario. The village cemetery, its open back, tiered coffin shelves give form in the shape of a square and takes up one side of the hill. A collection of terraced houses tightly surrounds the ancient site, fronting the narrow, steeply cambered cobbled lanes, their width only fit for donkeys, kept in a small stable next to each front door. At one time the streets rang to the sound of those donkeys' feet. All the winding lanes led downwards as the village falls away to the base of the hill, ending up at the school next to the church and nunnery on one side, and the olive tree-lined valley on the other. The town's business and gossip, handed round by the old folk, distributed about the stepped fountain, the meeting place for all the old folk, perched on the stone blocks and seats, all in front of the shops and restaurants. The small children's voices bounced off the walls as they chased each other round the tables. A queue forms most days at the door of the post office. Coming up from the town, the road splits. To the left, Gauthine, and Ronda to the right, the coast road east to Malbert. Keeping to the right-hand road will take you past the restaurant. Continuing, you see a one-time donkey stable, grain store, and basket weaver's cottage, close to the roadside. This collection of workplaces and workers' huts was set on terraces developed into the finca Fuenta de la Cruz. Previous generations of travellers, merchants and donkey trains rested up before entering a town at night. Lodging houses and stabling was provided on each road leading to the village entrance. This ensured visitors could be seen and recognised, and the proper authorities warned what was afoot. It was a simple precaution, not just for security, but to give the correct welcome due, providing water for the animals and food for the guests. That there was a convenient basket weaver was an added convenience, and the stone ground wheat provided the bread. Most of the land about produced olive trees, and the finca had a number of fine bean trees for the donkeys. The Americans, Joe Linda Craven, the potter, and Ian, the property developer, owned the house and grounds, having it landscaped artistically, with the garden paths winding down the hillside. The property grew under the romantic vision of its owners. The roadside finca, a small rustic cottage, was set overlooking the hillside, with a sunroom whose flank of windows opened up the whole sweep of the valley. This room, built to link to the dining room, its balustrade of wrought iron looked down into the lounge area. The name Serendipity Terry thought inappropriate, unbecoming for a rustic Andalusian finca, unsympathetic to the history and status of the town. He changed the name later to Puerta de la Cruz, resting place of the cross. The whole property sat on a crag of rock, a collection of parts skilfully interconnected to make a comfortable living accommodation. All the original parts of the building remained complete. Cane ceiling on rustic poles, rough plastered walls, terracotta tiled floors, which included the original threshing floor, iron-grilled shuttered windows set in thick stonework with doors studded with iron nails, in typically Spanish countryside style, blocking out the penetrating sunlight. Lower down, the garden was a working pottery, with a studio, furnace room, drying room and wheel room, all stocked with the necessary articles necessary to the productive potter. Further along the garden path towards the village was a small, self-contained cottage at the furthest end of the garden. All these parts were positioned in a spectacular setting, facing an opposing hill, where vultures soared in the thermals above the stream flowing in the ravine below. The whole 3 acres were constructed on terracing held in place by typically stone-walled walling, retaining the soil and irrigation water. Originally the terracing would have been planted out with olive, almond, fig and citrus trees, with kitchen produce grown in between the trees. These terraces were now planted with numerous flowering trees interlaced with roses, banana, lavender and oleander. The largest flat area had given way to lawn with its central circular flower bed. On wonderful crisp clear days could be seen, by looking down through the valley towards the Mediterranean Sea, the Rift Mountains of Africa. At night the twinkling lights of Ceuta on the African coast cast a spell of fairy-like glitter on a jet-black curtain. All these romantic parts to be experienced at first hand. As Terry, Josephine and Helen passed the property, Josephine spied some olive oil pots for sale. This was just what she was looking for. Terry, at her call, stopped the car and she dived out to ask the price, disappearing down a path to find the owner. Helen and Terry stayed in the car. When she came out, much later, she said that it was not the pots that were for sale, but the whole property, and for this she was negotiating. Helen said that was just typical, and Terry had to agree. Although they were thinking of moving away from the clinical, restrictive and English-speaking conclave at Sotogrande, Terry would have much preferred to have lived in a town, to be amongst Spanish-speaking inhabitants. He had already seen a property for sale in San Roque, in the town centre, close to the town hall, whilst waiting for Anna to finish her flamenco lessons. It was perfect for what Terry wanted, a place where Anna could integrate with the neighbours.